It began with a quiet disclosure that was never meant to leave the walls of a private Windsor gathering. For years, Prince Philip's final letter to the family had been spoken of with reverence, described as a heartfelt farewell from a man who spent more than 7 decades at the center of royal history. But when Sophie, Duchess of Edinburgh, reportedly referenced a forgotten clause hidden deep within that final document, everything changed. What had been considered a simple message of reflection suddenly became the center of a royal mystery that threatened to reopen old questions about duty, loyalty, and the future of the monarchy. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. At first, the whispers seemed insignificant. Royal families are no strangers to rumors, and private correspondence from senior figures often becomes the subject of endless speculation. Yet this felt different. Those closest to the institution reportedly spoke of an unusual sense of caution whenever Prince Philip's final letter was mentioned. The document itself had long been viewed as a personal farewell, a collection of reflections from a man who had witnessed the reigns of monarchs, the rise and fall of governments, and the transformation of Britain itself. Few questioned its contents because few believed there was anything left to uncover. But according to growing reports from royal circles, one particular section had received far less attention than the rest, quietly sitting in the background while more emotional passages attracted public interest. What made the situation even more intriguing was the suggestion that Sophie became aware of details that many insiders had either overlooked or deliberately chosen not to discuss. Those claims immediately sparked a wave of questions. How could a clause connected to such an important document remain largely unknown? Who had access to it? And perhaps most importantly, why was it only becoming a topic of discussion now? The deeper people looked, the more complicated the story appeared. Conversations that had once remained confined to private family gatherings suddenly gained new significance. Long-forgotten remarks were re-examined. Old assumptions were challenged. Even seemingly minor decisions from previous years began to look different through this new lens. As interest intensified, attention shifted toward Prince Philip himself. Throughout his life, he earned a reputation for speaking bluntly when others preferred silence. He understood the pressures placed upon the monarchy and often expressed concern about its ability to adapt while preserving its identity. That history made the alleged clause impossible to ignore. If Philip had indeed included a final warning or recommendation within his letter, then it carried weight far beyond a personal farewell. It represented the perspective of a man who had spent a lifetime observing the institution from its very center. Suddenly, people were no longer discussing a private message. They were discussing a potential roadmap, a cautionary statement, or perhaps even an unfinished conversation about the monarchy's future. The atmosphere surrounding the revelation reportedly grew even more tense as different branches of the family began revisiting Philip's final wishes. Some believed the clause simply reflected concerns he had expressed many times before. Others feared it contained observations that remained painfully relevant. Quiet disagreements emerged over interpretation. Questions about responsibility, leadership, and long-term stability resurfaced. The more the alleged clause was discussed, the clearer it became that its significance extended far beyond the words themselves. It touched sensitive issues that had never fully disappeared. And as speculation continued to spread through palace circles and beyond, one unsettling possibility began to emerge. Perhaps Prince Philip had foreseen challenges that would only become visible years after his passing. But the alleged clause was not merely a personal message, it seemed to contain a warning that would cast a long shadow over everything that followed. Most believed Prince Philip's final words had already served their purpose. The mourning period had passed. Tributes had been delivered. The nation had moved forward. Yet whispers began suggesting that one section of the letter carried significance far beyond remembrance, transforming it from a farewell into something resembling a royal roadmap. That possibility changed everything. What had once been viewed as a deeply personal reflection from a departing patriarch was now being reconsidered through an entirely different lens. Prince Philip had never been a man known for speaking without purpose. Throughout decades of public service, he built a reputation as a strategist who often looked years ahead while others focused only on the present. He understood that institution survived not because they avoided challenges, but because they prepared for them long before those challenges arrived. That understanding became a central part of the growing fascination surrounding the letter. If Philip had left behind guidance, many wondered whether it was intended not merely for comfort, but for direction. The circumstances surrounding the drafting of the document only deepened the mystery. By the time the letter was written, Philip had witnessed extraordinary change within both the monarchy and the world beyond palace walls. He had seen moments of triumph that strengthened the institution and crises that threatened to shake public confidence. He understood the burden carried by those who inherited responsibility rather than choosing it. For that reason, many family members reportedly viewed the letter as more than a simple farewell. It was regarded as a legacy document, a final opportunity for one of the monarchy's most experienced figures to pass on lessons gathered over a lifetime of service. As royal insiders allegedly revisited portions of the letter, attention increasingly focused on Philip's lifelong concern for institutional stability. Stability was not merely a preference for him, it was a principle. He believed that the monarchy's strength depended on continuity, discipline, and an understanding that individual ambitions must sometimes yield to larger responsibilities. Those beliefs had shaped countless private conversations throughout the years. Now, some began questioning whether the same philosophy had found its way into his final written message. That speculation fueled growing interest in passages that reportedly addressed future succession challenges. While much of the public attention naturally centered on King Charles and his responsibilities, rumors suggested Philip's perspective extended much further. Some believed the letter contained reflections intended for future generations as well, not just guidance for one reign. Observations meant to help preserve the institution long after current figures had passed from the stage. Such claims remained impossible to verify publicly, yet they carried enormous emotional weight. The possibility that Philip had been thinking several generations ahead transformed the discussion from a matter of family history into something far more consequential. What made the alleged clause especially intriguing were suggestions that it emphasized loyalty and responsibility above all else. Those themes had defined much of Philip's life. Duty over comfort, service over popularity, commitment over convenience. According to whispers circulating within royal circles, the language was understated, almost easy to overlook. There were no dramatic declarations, no sweeping commands. Instead, the message may have been delivered with the same quiet firmness that had characterized Philip's approach for decades. And perhaps that was precisely why it remained hidden in plain sight for so long. Because the more people examined the possibility of an intentionally understated warning, the more they began asking who Philip expected would one day read those words and recognize their meaning. And as attention shifted from the letter itself to the people it might have been addressing, a far more uncomfortable question began to emerge. Sophie had rarely been associated with royal controversy. Known for quiet service rather than public confrontation, she was often viewed as one of the monarchy's most dependable figures. That is precisely why reports of her drawing attention to Philip's forgotten clause sent such shockwaves through palace circles. For years, Sophie occupied a unique position within the royal family. She was respected not because she sought influence, but because she rarely appeared to seek it at all. Her reputation had been built on consistency, loyalty, and a willingness to support the institution without demanding recognition in return. That reputation made the growing whispers surrounding Philip's final letter impossible to dismiss. If someone known for caution and discretion was allegedly revisiting sensitive discussions tied to the late Duke's final wishes, many believed there had to be a reason. The connection between Sophie and Prince Philip only intensified the intrigue. During his later years, she was frequently described as one of the family members with whom he shared a particularly warm understanding. Their relationship was often characterized by mutual respect, common values, and a shared appreciation for duty. Philip admired individuals who placed service above personal ambition, and many observers believed Sophie embodied those qualities. Because of that history, reports suggesting she had renewed conversations about the overlooked clause immediately carried weight. People wondered whether she had simply recalled something important or whether she had recognized a significance others had failed to see. As speculation spread, attention quickly shifted away from the existence of the clause and toward its meaning. Questions that had once seemed theoretical suddenly became urgent. Why revisit the matter now? Why raise concerns tied to a document that many believed had already fulfilled its purpose? The timing itself fueled curiosity. The monarchy was navigating a period of transition, adaptation, and scrutiny. Public expectations were evolving. Internal responsibilities were changing. Against that backdrop, the idea that Philip might have left behind guidance designed for difficult moments felt increasingly plausible. What surprised many observers most was the suggestion that family insiders were caught off guard by Sophie's willingness to revisit the issue. She was not known for creating tension. She was known for helping ease it. Yet according to reports circulating within royal circles, her interest in Philip's final wishes prompted renewed discussions among senior figures. Conversations that may have once seemed desettled were suddenly reopened. Interpretations differed. Assumptions were questioned. The comfortable certainty that had surrounded the letter began to erode. At the heart of those discussions was a growing belief that Philip's message may never have been intended as a reflection on the past alone. Some suspected it was crafted with future decisions in mind. That possibility transformed the clause into something far more consequential than a personal sentiment. If Philip had anticipated challenges ahead, then every word carried additional significance. His observations were no longer being viewed as memories. They were being examined as guidance. The emotional impact of that realization spread quietly but steadily. Senior royals reportedly found themselves reconsidering old conversations and forgotten remarks. Individuals who had once viewed Philip's advice as part of history began wondering whether its relevance had never truly faded. The more attention the clause received, ongoing the sense became that his influence had survived his passing. Not through ceremonies or public tributes, but through ideas, through principles, through words that appeared capable of shaping decisions long after they were written. And perhaps that was the most remarkable development of all. The debate was no longer about what Philip had said. It was about why he had said it, what he feared, and what he hoped future generations would understand. Because if the forgotten clause carried the weight many now suspected, then it was pointing toward concerns that stretched far beyond a single moment in royal history. But understanding the clause required understanding the concerns that reportedly inspired Philip to write it in the first place. According to Palace Whispers, the most important part of Philip's letter was not what it openly stated, but what it quietly implied. Beneath the language of family unity and responsibility appeared to be a deeper concern, one focused on preserving the institution he had spent his life supporting. For those who knew Prince Philip's approach to royal life, such a concern would have come as no surprise. Throughout decades of service, he consistently placed duty ahead of personal comfort. He understood that the crown survived not because of individual personalities, but because of a collective commitment to something larger than any one person. That belief shaped nearly every chapter of his public life. It influenced his decisions, guided his sacrifices, and defined his understanding of responsibility. As speculations surrounding the hidden clause intensified, many began to suspect that the message reflected those same convictions one final time. The alleged wording may have appeared simple on the surface, but its implications were anything but simple. Reports suggested that the clause focused heavily on the long-term stability of the monarchy. Not the challenges of a single year or a single reign, but the survival of the institution as lost generations. For Philip, stability was never merely about preserving tradition for its own sake. It was about maintaining public confidence during moments of uncertainty. It was about ensuring that future custodians of the crown understood the weight of the responsibilities they inherited. That perspective gave the clause an almost prophetic quality. The more people discussed it, the more it seemed to speak not only to the present, but also to challenges still waiting on the horizon. At the heart of the growing debate were recurring themes of sacrifice and responsibility. Those who interpreted the clause as a warning believed Philip was reminding future generations that royal privilege could never be separated from royal obligation. Every benefit came with a cost. Every position carried expectations. Every decision had consequences reaching far beyond personal interests. Such ideas had always been central to Philip's worldview. Yet when viewed through the lens of current tensions ninth modern pressures, they took on renewed significance. That is where the conversation became increasingly sensitive. Rumors began suggesting that Philip may have been concerned about the dangers posed by internal divisions. Not necessarily specific disputes, but the broader risk that personal disagreements could weaken public confidence. History had shown repeatedly that institutions often face their greatest threats not from outside forces but from fractures within. If the clause contained even an indirect warning about unity, it would explain why some family members viewed it with such seriousness. Concerns regarding public trust reportedly formed another layer of interpretation. The monarchy's relationship with the public has always depended upon perception as much as tradition. Confidence can take decades to build and moments to damage. Those reflecting on Philip's final message wondered whether he had anticipated future periods of scrutiny and uncertainty. If so, his emphasis on loyalty may have been intended as a reminder that maintaining trust required discipline, consistency, and a shared sense of purpose. Yet, as often happens with messages left open to interpretation, consensus proved elusive. Different family members reportedly drew different conclusions. Some saw guidance. Others saw caution. Some viewed the clause as a philosophical reflection rather than a direct warning. Others believed it carried a far more urgent meaning. With each interpretation, the mystery deepened rather than faded. Instead of providing answers, the alleged clause generated new questions. Instead of settling debates, it reignited them. And perhaps that was precisely why interest continued to grow. Because the real issue was no longer the wording itself. The focus was shifting toward the individuals who might see themselves reflected within its message. The closer people examined Philip's concerns, the harder it became to ignore the possibility that certain members of the family could feel particularly affected by what he had chosen to say. As competing interpretations spread, attention inevitably turned toward who might feel most affected by Philip's final warning. No document creates tension faster than one open to interpretation. What some reportedly viewed as a message of unity, others allegedly saw as a caution against choices that could weaken the institution. Suddenly, Philip's words were no longer resting peacefully in history, they were shaping debates in the present. That transformation marked a dramatic turning point in the story surrounding the Forgotten Clause. Until then, much of the discussion had focused on what Prince Philip may have intended to say. Now the focus shifted toward how those words were being understood. And that distinction changed everything. A message that means one thing to one person can mean something entirely different to another, especially when it comes from a figure whose influence stretched across generations. What was NCE considered a private family document had become a mirror, reflecting different fears, hopes, and interpretations depending on who was reading it. Reports suggested that various branches of the family began viewing the clause through entirely different lenses. Some allegedly interpreted it as a call for unity during uncertain times, a reminder that personal differences should never overshadow collective responsibility. Others reportedly believed it carried a more pointed warning, one directed toward decisions that could place strain on the institution's long-term stability. Neither side could claim certainty. The very ambiguity of the message gave it power. The fewer definitive answers it offered, the more room there was for competing conclusions. That uncertainty naturally led to another question, one that lingered over every discussion. Who was Philip actually addressing? Was the message intended for a single individual, a specific generation, or the family as a whole? The absence of a clear answer only intensified speculation. Every phrase was examined. Every reported detail was revisited. The deeper people looked, the more difficult it became to separate interpretation from intention. What had started as curiosity was evolving into something much larger. Questions regarding succession, responsibility, and public duty soon found their way into the conversation. These were not new subjects within royal circles. They had existed for generations, shaping decisions both public and private. Yet the alleged clause appeared to bring them into sharper focus. If Philip had truly left behind guidance concerning the future, then many wondered whether he had anticipated challenges that would emerge long after he was gone. That possibility gave the discussion an almost haunting quality. His voice was absent, yet his influence seemed remarkably present. As interest continued to grow, advisors reportedly became concerned about the renewed wave of speculation. The monarchy has spent years navigating periods of intense public attention, and the last thing many wanted was another mystery drawing scrutiny toward internal matters. Yet attempts to contain interest only seemed to fuel it further. The more questions remained unanswered, the more determined people became to find meaning hidden between the lines. At the center of the storm stood Sophie. Ironically, the very person known for avoiding controversy now found herself unexpectedly linked to one of the most talked about royal discussions in years. She had not sought the spotlight, yet reports connecting her to the forgotten clause placed her at the heart of the unfolding narrative. Observers began paying closer attention to her role, her relationship with Philip, and her apparent willingness to revisit a subject others may have preferred to leave untouched. Meanwhile, palace insiders reportedly worked quietly to manage growing attention. The challenge was not merely controlling rumors. It was addressing the broader symbolism the clause had acquired. Increasingly, the document was being viewed as more than a single message from the past. It had become a symbol of wider tensions, larger questions, and unresolved concerns about the monarchy's future direction. Every interpretation seemed to reveal a different fault line. Every discussion uncovered another layer of uncertainty. Yet beneath the speculation, beneath the debates, and beneath the growing public fascination, there remained something even more significant. Because for all the conversations about duty, succession, and institutional stability, the real consequences were not confined to royal strategy. They reached into relationships, memories, and emotions that no constitutional discussion could fully capture. Yet the greatest impact of the revelation was not political or procedural, it was deeply personal. As discussions intensified, many found themselves returning to memories of Prince Philip himself. Long before the controversy, he had built a reputation as a man who spoke bluntly, planned carefully, and viewed duty as a lifelong obligation rather than a temporary role. That reputation was not created overnight. It was forged across decades of service, sacrifice, and relentless commitment to an institution that demanded more than most people could imagine. For generations, Prince Philip stood at the center of royal life, not as the monarch, but as one of its strongest pillars. He witnessed historic transitions, family triumphs, national celebrations, and moments of profound uncertainty. Through it all, one characteristic remained remarkably consistent. He believed that duty came first, not when it was convenient, not when it was popular, always. As the mystery surrounding the hidden clause continued to unfold, many people found themselves looking back at that philosophy with renewed attention. Suddenly, stories once regarded as simple reflections on Philip's character seemed to carry deeper meaning. Family members had often described him as someone who rarely wasted words. When he offered advice, it was practical. When he voiced concerns, they were usually grounded in experience rather than emotion. He was known for seeing problems long before they became obvious to others. That ability to think ahead became one of the defining themes of the growing discussion surrounding his final letter. For younger generations of the family, Philip had reportedly served as something more than a relative. He was an advisor, a mentor, and at times a source of uncomfortable truths. He understood that leadership required difficult choices. He understood that public responsibility could not always coexist comfortably with personal desires. Those lessons were not always easy to hear, but they often proved difficult to forget. As whispers about the forgotten clause spread, many began wondering whether the message represented one final attempt to pass along those same lessons. The emotional weight of revisiting Philip's final wishes only added to the intensity of the moment. This was not simply a debate about words on a page. It was a conversation tied to memory, legacy, and the lasting influence of a man who had shaped royal life for more than 70 years. Every reported detail seemed to carry an emotional undertone. Every interpretation felt connected to a larger question about what Philip ultimately wanted his family to remember. In many ways, Sophie's role in the story reinforced that emotional connection. Her long-standing bond with Philip made her involvement feel especially significant. She was often seen as someone who understood his perspective, someone who appreciated the values he spent a lifetime defending. As attention increasingly focused on the hidden clause, many observers viewed her actions through that lens. Rather than reigniting controversy, some believed she was attempting to ensure that an important piece of Philip's legacy was not forgotten. Whether those assumptions were accurate or not, they contributed to the growing perception that his influence remained remarkably alive. Public fascination expanded alongside the mystery. People were drawn not only to the possibility of a forgotten clause but also to what it revealed about Philip himself. There was a sense that previously overlooked aspects of his thinking were finally receiving attention. His long-term vision, his concerns about stability, and his unwavering belief in responsibility suddenly felt more relevant than ever. The hidden clause became a doorway into a broader conversation about the values he spent a lifetime promoting. And perhaps that explains why the story continued to resonate so deeply. Beneath the speculation and uncertainty was a renewed appreciation for a figure who had devoted decades to protecting an institution he believed would outlast any individual. The more people reflected on his words, the more they wondered whether he had left behind something far greater than a farewell. Because if the clause truly carried the meaning many suspected, then its purpose had not yet been fulfilled. But perhaps the most significant consequence of the hidden clause was still to come. The controversy surrounding the clause ultimately raised a larger question. What kind of monarchy did Prince Philip hope would survive after him? The answer, according to various interpretations, may reveal more about his legacy than any public speech ever could. By this stage, the discussion had evolved far beyond the wording of a single document. The hidden clause had become a lens through which people examined Philip's entire life, his values, and his hopes for the institution he spent more than 7 decades supporting. What began as curiosity about an overlooked passage had transformed into a deeper search for meaning. The real mystery was no longer what Philip wrote. The real mystery was what future he believed the monarchy would face, and what lessons he wanted future generations to carry into that future. Those attempting to interpret the message often arrived at one recurring theme: resilience. Throughout his lifetime, Philip witnessed enormous change. He saw the monarchy adapt to shifting public expectations, cultural transformations, and moments of intense scrutiny. Yet despite those challenges, he consistently believed that survival depended on an institution's ability to remain steady while the world around it changed. That belief appeared to echo through many interpretations of the clause. Rather than resisting every challenge, the monarchy needed the strength to endure them. Rather than fearing uncertainty, it needed the confidence to navigate it. Closely connected to that idea was the principle of continuity. Philip understood that royal history stretched across generations. Individual reigns mattered, but the institution itself was designed to outlast any one person. According to those reflecting on the alleged clause, this long-term perspective may have been one of its most important messages. Decisions made today would shape perceptions tomorrow. Actions taken in one generation could influence the stability of the next. Such thinking required patience, discipline, and a willingness to prioritize the future over immediate concerns. Responsibility formed another cornerstone of the debate. Philip reportedly believed that privilege and obligation could never be separated. Titles alone carried no meaning unless accompanied by service. Recognition meant little without sacrifice. As discussions surrounding the clause continued, many concluded that this philosophy remained central to his vision for the monarchy's future. The institution could only thrive if those entrusted with its stewardship understood the responsibilities that came with their positions. Within that broader conversation, the role of senior royals became increasingly significant. They were viewed not merely as public figures but as guardians of traditions passed down through generations. Their choices influenced how the monarchy was perceived and how it evolved. The hidden clause, whether intentionally or not, appeared to remind people of that reality. Leadership was not simply about authority. It was about protecting something larger than oneself. Sophie's place within the story also took on new meaning. As interest in Philip's final wishes grew, many saw her emerging as an important steward of his memory. Not because she claimed ownership of his legacy, but because her actions allegedly encouraged people to revisit principles he considered essential. Through her connection to the discussion, Philip's voice seemed to remain part of an ongoing conversation rather than a chapter permanently closed. Public fascination reflected something deeper than curiosity about royal affairs. People were responding to questions about values, continuity, and purpose. The hidden clause had become symbolic. It represented the enduring influence of ideas that survived beyond the individual who first expressed them. More importantly, it raised difficult questions about how future leaders might interpret those ideas. Would they view them as guidance, caution, or inspiration? The answer remained uncertain. Yet perhaps uncertainty was always part of the story, because the true power of the clause was not that it provided definitive answers. Its power was that it compelled people to ask important questions. And as the mystery surrounding the clause continued to unfold, one final truth became impossible to ignore. Years after his passing, Prince Philip's voice appeared to echo once more through the corridors of royal history. Whether the hidden clause was a warning, a request, or simply a reflection of his deepest beliefs, its reported emergence ensured that his influence would not fade quietly into the past. What began as a forgotten detail buried within a private family letter had grown into something far larger than anyone could have anticipated. The discussion was no longer centered on a single clause or a single document. It had become a story about legacy, responsibility, and the enduring power of ideas. In many ways, the mystery itself revealed something remarkable about Prince Philip. Even after his passing, he remained capable of shaping conversations, provoking reflection, and encouraging people to reconsider what truly mattered to the institution he had served for most of his life. The lasting significance of the letter did not come from certainty. In fact, it came from the absence of certainty. The reported clause inspired debate because it left room for interpretation. Some believed it contained a warning. Others saw guidance. Some viewed it as a final appeal for unity, while others interpreted it as a reminder that duty must always take precedence over personal interests. Yet despite those differences, nearly everyone agreed on one thing. The message reflected concerns that Prince Philip carried throughout his lifetime. Concerns about continuity. Concerns about public trust. Concerns about whether future generations would understand the responsibilities attached to the privileges they inherited. Sophie's role in bringing renewed attention to the forgotten clause became an important part of that story. Her connection to Philip, her reputation for loyalty, and her apparent willingness to revisit a sensitive subject transformed her into an unexpected figure at the center of the discussion. She did not become important because she sought controversy. She became important because her actions allegedly encouraged others to look again at words they had long assumed were fully understood. In doing so, she helped reignite a conversation about Philip's values and the lessons he hoped would endure. Yet for all the speculation, the true meaning of the clause remained elusive. That mystery became part of its power. Every unanswered question seemed to generate another. Every interpretation revealed a different perspective. The uncertainty ensured that the conversation would continue long after the initial reports faded. Rather than closing a chapter, the clause appeared to open a new one. A chapter focused not on the past alone, but on the future of the monarchy itself. At the heart of Philip's broader legacy were themes that had followed him throughout his extraordinary life. Duty, service, resilience, and responsibility. These were not abstract ideas to him. They were principles that shaped decisions, relationships, and expectations. As the monarchy continued navigating the difficult balance between preserving tradition and adapting to a changing world, those principles felt more relevant than ever. The challenges facing the institution had evolved, but the fundamental questions remained remarkably familiar. How should tradition be protected? How should change be managed? And how could public trust be maintained in an era of constant scrutiny? For family members, supporters, and observers alike, the emotional impact of revisiting Philip's final wishes extended beyond politics or protocol. It touched on memory. It touched on loss. It touched on the realization that some voices continue influencing events long after they fall silent. The hidden clause became symbolic of that truth. It represented the enduring presence of a man whose influence could still be felt years after his departure. And perhaps that is why fascination with the letter shows no sign of disappearing. Because the mystery was never only about what Prince Philip wrote. It was about what he believed, what he feared, and what he hoped future generations would remember. Because in the House of Windsor, some voices never truly disappear, and sometimes the most powerful message is the one hidden between the lines until the moment history is ready to hear it. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.